and welcome to this part 1 Q&A. Today I want to answer some very popular questions on getting into consulting. If you're new here, welcome. I'm Anastasia. I'm based in London. I'm 26 years old and I'm a consultant at a Big 4 firm. Number 1 is, what did you study to get into consulting, and other particular degrees and subjects that are preferred? My experience before consulting in terms of education was I had my undergrad at LSE and it was in government and economics. That was for 3 years. Then I did my master's at UCL. That was in creative and collaborative enterprise. And if you have questions about what the hell that is, I made a whole video explaining my course because it was very weird and very experimental. It was only the second year that course was running at UCL, created by someone who runs a theatre company. So if you're curious about that one, I'll leave the link down below and you can have a look and also cringe at me from 2 years ago when I filmed it. But yeah, so my background is kind of social sciences, and I do think that tends to be popular among the people that go into consulting in the end. But I did not study those things with the view of going into consulting as my goal. Consulting happened, and I can tell you more about that later. But yeah, I do think business management, economics, all of those things tend to be quite handy when it comes to applying for a consulting job. But that being said, they're not necessary. And also, consulting is so wide. For me personally, because I'm in human capital, a lot of things that I learned, for example, in economics or in entrepreneurship side of things, that could come in handy for me. But if you are, for example, in tech consulting, computer science might have been way more useful for you. There is a range of subjects, and I know people who've studied all sorts of stuff. I'd say have a look on LinkedIn and just see what people who have gotten into that specific area of consulting have studied before, and that'll give you a good idea of the range. Question number 2, can you get into consulting without a top uni degree? And I want to give you a very honest answer. I think point number 1 to mention is that I'm sure that having gone to LSE and UCL, both of them are well-recognized unis. I do think that opened some doors for me at the initial screening stage, but whether you then can actually get the job offer, I think that'll depend completely on you and how you do in the interview process and the whole assessment process. So yes, it definitely helped, at least that would be my guess. However, I don't think it's needed, and I do think that there will be a much wider range of universities that you can get into consulting from, including Big 4, including maybe the Big 3. It depends on the specific requirements, but never is it specified in the application process that you have to hold a degree from a particular uni. Unlike in Suits and in a law firm where you have to have gone to Harvard, I don't think that there is so much restriction on where you've gone. There are usually requirements on what type of result you got, and where you got it from I don't think matters as much if you can actually show that you are well suited for the job. And finally, on that question, there are also a lot of schemes now to get people into corporate jobs without having gone to uni at all, and I think that's a very good initiative that's happening. We, for example, have a whole cohort of Bright Starts joining every year, and those are people who just finished school. You have to apply. It's kind of a similar process to get into that scheme, but then you get into your first job when you're 18 years old and you start making money, and you can also get sponsored to actually do an undergrad degree in parallel to your job if you want to. So there are many options there, and there's a ton of opportunity to get into the job without going to uni. So I think if your question is, do I need to go to uni just to enable that job? I don't think so. If you want to go to uni for other reasons and you think it's going to serve you long term and you can afford it and you're in a position to go and dedicate the time and the money, yeah, I think that's a separate question. Next question is, I have some work experience. Do I still go to the graduate scheme, and do I still apply at the entry level? That was my situation. So to give you my timeline, I finished my master's in 2019. Then I worked in a dance company for 2 years into the pandemic, famously. Then I worked for a year in an art therapy organization doing marketing and social media for them. So I was in a small nonprofit, and then I ended up in consulting. So I had about 3 years of work experience, very different from what you would typically see in a consulting firm. And because I didn't have any experience working in a, firstly, big corporate firm, but also a consulting capacity, I still went for the graduate scheme, and I think that was right for me. It probably gave me a little bit of an advantage, the fact that I've already had 2 jobs to show, and also some other previous experience working freelance for a startup. I've basically had ways to demonstrate my experience through those jobs, which was great. And there were other people in my position as well, so it's not uncommon for you to apply to a graduate scheme having worked elsewhere before. But if you have worked in consulting, if you have consulting experience, I do think that you'll get better value for yourself in terms of your salary and career progression if you apply as an experienced hire. And say if you had 1 year of experience in another firm, you can totally go for a consultant level as opposed to an analyst level, which is the entry one. Next one, what's the application process like? I have, as it happens, made a video about this. I'll link it below, but the process looks like, first you have the initial application with your CV or a form, maybe a cover letter. So that's the initial screening at which they decide whether they want to progress you to the next stage or not. If you do progress, typically you're sent an online assessment where you need to do some tasks, you need to do some calculations usually. You then are invited, depending on the specific firm of course, but I was invited to an online video interview. Mine was done through HireVue. It's this platform for video interviews, basically where you record yourself answering a question. After that, you're invited for an assessment center, and for me that was fully online, and it was divided into 2 parts. One was group exercise, that was with 6 people in total, including me, and then it's the partner slash director interview. I made a few videos about the process. One outlines the steps in a bit more detail, but the other one also gives you tips on how to approach it, particularly the interview. So I'm going to link all of those below. Final question to kind of conclude this section of the Q&A. I got the job. What happens now? How am I going to be starting? What's the process for that? So if you're joining on a graduate scheme, you will most likely have quite an extensive induction period. For me, that was 4 weeks. It's filled with different workshops and talks and sessions on just getting you started with firstly the tech and the admin and the logistics, learning some consulting skills, learning some basics, what's expected, but most importantly, it's a time to meet the people you're starting with, build your network, and just make friends. After you've done your induction, for me, the experience was that you get allocated your first project, and that's done by the resource managers in your firm who have visibility of what projects can take on an extra person. On the other hand, if you're an experienced hire, I think the story tends to be quite different, and I know from the people that I've spoken to, it might just be a matter of doing some online trainings and kind of taking 1 day to get started. I think you're expected to jump onto your work way sooner and much more quickly, and I guess it's natural for an experienced hire. But yeah, that concludes the first part. Let me know if this was useful. Let me know what other things you would like me to talk about. I'd like some guidance from you if you're watching this, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.